Welcome to Catalyze. I'm Sarah O'Carroll. Today's episode is a recording of a 7 talk from the 2022 Alumni Forum. This talk, given by Frank Bruni from the class of '86, is entitled Are Starfish.
Okay, this is officially scary. I'm Frank, but I want to talk to you, at least for starters, about a friend of mine named David Tatel. He's someone I met about 5 years ago. He's a retired judge, but when I met him, he was still on the bench. He was a judge with I don't always get this right, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Washington, D.C. District. It's a pretty dense and daunting proper noun, but basically it is the court just shy of the Supreme Court. It's probably the primary feeder court for the Supreme Court. Many justices on the Supreme Court have been elevated from that court. In other words, David Tatel had reached the pinnacle of his profession, and he was blind. He had been blind since he was about 30, but many of the lawyers who argued cases before him never knew that or didn't know that at the time. He had so mastered his environment that you couldn't tell. When he was on the bench and lawyers were arguing before him, he would move his head to the sounds of their voices as if he was looking at them. He would walk to and from the bench, to and from his chambers, without ever seeming to need assistance because he had memorized his physical environment so well. I got to know him pretty well over the subsequent years. Whenever I would go down to DC from New York for work, I would take some time and I would go talk to David in his chambers. I would sometimes have dinner with him and his wife, Edie. And one evening we were leaving the courthouse to travel the 8 miles to his Washington, D.C. home to meet Edie, who was cooking for us. And I said to him, okay, so I should now get an Uber or hail a taxi or call a Lyft or something, because I figure how does a blind man get home from work? And he said, no, we'll take the metro. And I thought, well, of course we'll take the metro because I'm here. He's going to grab my arm. I'm going to guide him. Wrong again. He pretty much did it on his own. I was walking alongside him. I was walking behind him. He had learned over the years, using his memory, using sound, to do all the things that someone else did with sight. He knew the number of steps from one street corner to another. He knew the number of steps from that street corner to the next one. He could use his hearing to figure out to listen to traffic and the footfall of other people and figure out when it was safe to cross the street. So I just followed along, and he led me to the metro, and he led me into the metro and through the turnstiles and to the exactly right platform. And when the car came, from his memory of the surroundings, from the sounds of the doors opening, from where he could sense other people were, he knew where and when to enter the train. And my sole contribution was to look for an empty seat and guide him toward that, something that strangers typically did for him if he didn't have someone like me around, because he did this by himself all the time. And as we sat down, I knew him well enough to know I could say something to him without sounding condescending or patronizing. I said, David, I can't believe what I just saw. You are such an inspiration that you can do all of that on your own. And he said to me, Frank, starfish can regrow limbs, but that's nothing compared to what human beings can do. He had just shown me that. He was proof of that. And I needed to hear that because I haven't told you why I met David Tatel. I was introduced to him weeks after I had a rare stroke that destroyed the vision in my right eye. Weeks after I was told that I would never recover vision in that eye and that there was a 20% chance the same thing would happen to my left eye, a 20% chance that I would go blind. Good odds, really high stakes. How do you live with that? What you do is you educate yourself. You educate yourself about what other people who have been dealt surprises like that and confronted limits like that, what they've done to adapt, what they've done to transcend those limits. You educate yourself about what people are capable of because that may well be what you're capable of when the situation demands it. So do you know that one of the most celebrated, if not the most celebrated, and popular and best-selling British travel writers of the early 1800s was a blind man? His name is James Holman, and I can't believe his legend isn't larger than it is, and we don't all know his name. He lived in an era when there was no commercial air travel, no cars and highways. He traveled by ship. He traveled by horseback, by horse-drawn carriage, and he went from Britain to Asia, to Africa, to South America, to Australia. In fact, he went to all those places and wrote about them based on what he heard, based on what he heard in the environment, the stories that people told him, based on smell, based on touch. He brought these places to life without ever having seen them with his eyes. And he, in fact, logged multiple times the number of miles that Marco Polo did. So if there was any justice in the world or in the world's swimming pools, children wouldn't say Marco to hear polo. They'd say James to hear Holman. James Holman was a starfish. I met and got to know a man who was working as a sound engineer at a very high level of the music industry when a rare cancer destroyed the hearing in one of his ears. He figured that might be it for his profession. His ears were his everything. But he didn't lose hope. He hung in there. He tried, and his brain performed an amazing trick. And he found himself able eventually to do with one ear what you were supposed to need two to do. He could hear in 3 dimensions. He could hear which direction sound was coming from. And he tells me he thinks he's better at his job today than he was before. He's a starfish. One of the most accomplished open water marathon swimmers in the world is a woman who didn't try to do that until she was about 30 years old. And she didn't do it until she had a horrible accident that mangled one of her legs so badly, doctors told her they thought they were going to have to amputate it. It took her 2 years to learn to walk again. And looking for a new source of exercise, looking for a new source of confidence and strength, she took to the open water. And within a matter of years, she became the first woman ever to swim the 30 infamously dangerous miles from an island off San Francisco through shark-infested waters to the Golden Gate Bridge. She's a starfish. She didn't regrow a limb, she grew fins. Scientists used to believe, not so long ago, we're talking about just a couple decades ago, that our brains sort of stopped growing or developing or doing much that was important after a certain age, that we got a sort of fixed amount of good stuff up there, and we burned through it at a constant clip, and that was that. In recent decades, though, they've realized, no, they were totally wrong. We generate new neurons well into old age. We make new synaptic connections. I don't have the exact scientific and medical vocabulary for this, but basically, we never stop learning and changing and adapting. There's a name for this school of belief and this area of medicine. It's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity basically says we are all starfish. And that is such an important lesson to keep in mind as you age or when you're young and you're a student, because it's a lesson in infinite possibility. David Tatel, James Holman, the sound engineer I introduced you to, the marathon swimmer, you, me, starfish, all of us. What an incredible source of consolation, and what a generous and deep wellspring of hope. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Catalyze. I'm Sarah O'Carroll. You can watch all of the 7 talks on our YouTube channel at Morehead-Cain. If you want to let us know what you thought of the 7 talk or who you want to hear from next on Catalyze, email us at communications@moreheadcain.org. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks for listening.